Hello, I'm Robin Koval, President and CEO of Truth Initiative, the national public health organization dedicated to achieving a culture where all young people reject smoking, vaping, and nicotine. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Truth Initiative Impact Series, Tobacco-Free Screens, Changing the Picture on the Tobacco Industry's Influence in Popular Entertainment. With on-screen entertainment options continuing to grow, the tobacco industry, unfortunately, continues to have a starring role. And that's why Truth Initiative recently published our 5th annual While You Were Streaming report, which confirms tobacco imagery in popular entertainment is frequent, pervasive, and virtually inescapable for today's young people. Images have influence, and by enabling highly addictive nicotine products to have a starring role, entertainment platforms, executives, creators, and celebrities are serving as unpaid spokespeople and promoters for the tobacco industry, whether they know it or not. And that has tremendous consequences for young audiences nationwide. Here's an example. Many of us probably just watched the recent Academy Awards. This year, 9 of the 10 Best Picture nominees, including the winning film, featured tobacco imagery. That's on top of the more than 70% of total movies nominated, including multiple PG-13 and even PG-rated films. It's against this background that our new report, Tobacco's Starring Role, explores the breadth and the depth of how smoking and vaping nicotine remains normalized and glamorized in today's top entertainment content. We're working to address this important issue, but to make a real impact, we need all members of the entertainment industry, from creators to executives to actors alike, to join with us to change the picture to protect our nation's youth. And that's the focus of today's discussion, changing the picture on the tobacco industry's influence in popular entertainment, a picture you can clearly see in our latest While You Were Streaming video. Take a look.
I also would like to see where this is going. You smoke those cigarettes, you're gonna throw up like a little...
You're all complicit. No.
Before we begin, I'd like to introduce a special speaker to help set the stage for today's discussion. Michael Tynan is a public health analyst at the CDC's Office on Smoking and Health, where he works with states and communities on tobacco control policy issues. Michael?
Thank you, Robin, and thank you for asking me to be here today. Marketing is a key to having a successful business. It's how consumers find your brand, it's how you maintain brand loyalty, and it's how you promote product innovation. And the avenues where tobacco companies can market their products are limited. Cigarette companies haven't been able to advertise on television since the 1970s. This year is also the 25th anniversary of the Master Settlement Agreement. And that's important because the MSA was a key tool that closed many of these avenues where tobacco companies can advertise. Of course, we know that the point of sale is a tightly structured marketing machine for these companies, but it isn't the only way for them to promote and normalize tobacco use to consumers. We know that all people, including youth, are watching media on their phones, on their tablets, and on their smart TVs. And tobacco use in popular media is a direct way to change public attitudes on tobacco use. It helps these companies if tobacco use is normalized in public media. And the industry has a track record through the history of cinema of normalizing smoking and making it seem cool, as if it was a natural part of society. So as all of the other marketing options for companies are closed or closing, tobacco use imagery through popular culture is a natural way for tobacco companies to reach and find replacement smokers. We also know from a robust body of research that tobacco use imagery in popular media is not harmless. The Surgeon General concluded that exposure to on-screen smoking in movies causes young people to start smoking. It is critical that the public health and research community works to fully understand the extent and reach of tobacco imagery to youth in all forms of media, including emerging social and online media, and to shine a light and educate the public, including parents, teachers, and young people about this issue. So I'll now hand it back to Robin to introduce the panel.
Thanks so much, Michael. We always appreciate your insights and the CDC's strong commitment to this important issue. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Hannah Yesharoff. Hannah is an entertainment and lifestyle reporter at USA Today, where she specializes in the intersection of the wellness industry and celebrity culture. USA Today helped to launch the news about our national While You Were Streaming report for several years, with Hannah writing last year's powerful story. That coverage sparked action by elected officials, including states' attorneys general and Senators Markey, Blumenthal, and Van Hollen, all urging Netflix to take steps to decrease young people's exposure to tobacco imagery and their content. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Hannah to introduce our esteemed panel and get the discussion started.
Thank you, Robin, and hi, everyone. We appreciate you joining us today. Over the past few years, we've seen on-screen entertainment play an important role in all of our lives. Streaming outperformed both cable and broadcast TV for the first time in July 2022, and the plethora of new streaming subscription services offered increased opportunities for viewership. As Robin noted, USA Today has played a role in shining a spotlight on this issue, breaking news of this report for the past few years and inspiring action from the entertainment industry and elected officials alike. As problems persist, we're here to discuss how to better understand the issue and also how creators, networks, and others can work together to change the picture. Truth Initiative's 5th annual While You Were Streaming report shows that of the 15 most popular streaming shows among 15 to 24-year-olds, 60% contained depictions of tobacco in 2021. And an analysis by Nork at the University of Chicago found that 47% of top films in 2021 featured tobacco imagery, including at least one PG-rated movie and 16 PG-13 rated movies. So what's the real-world impact of these images, and what steps can be taken to counterbalance the tobacco industry's influence? For that, we will turn to our panel here today. Joining us, we have Jessica Rath, Vice President of Truth Initiative Schroeder Institute, Jennifer McClory Hamilton, Deputy Attorney General of California, Sherry Emery, Senior Fellow of Public Health at Nork at the University of Chicago, and Jorge Alday, Director of Stopping Tobacco Organizations and Products. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's dive in. Jessica, I'd like to start with you. As the lead author of the Tobacco's Starring Role study, What were your major takeaways from this report?
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for the question. So, we called this report Tobacco's Starring Role because really that's exactly where we are. I think of it when I think of the lead takeaways. As our report states, Big Tobacco really just maintained its starring role in popular on-screen entertainment. All of our work is grounded in this long-established research. It tells us that smoking in movies prompts young people to start using tobacco. But more recently in 2020, Truth Initiative was really the first to publish that same link, only we looked at episodic streaming instead of movies. So we demonstrated that exposure to tobacco imagery in streaming media can triple a young person's odds of starting to vape. So now we have this link between smoking, like even smoking cigarettes on a screen, and vaping as the behavior of choice for youth. So in the report, we shared that 60% of those 15 most popular streaming shows among 15 to 24-year-olds contain tobacco depictions, and this was just no improvement from 2020. This effectively exposes about 25 million young people to tobacco imagery just in the streaming alone. This year, I wanted to point out that Showtime took the #1 spot from Netflix as the top offending platform, and this was really mainly due to their hit show called Shameless. It more than doubled its numbers of depictions from its prior season last year, and it really threw Showtime into that #1 spot for platforms, not a #1 spot people want. So we continued our work as well this year in music videos, and we had almost 13% of the top 2021 Billboard songs having tobacco in the music videos. This equated to about 97 music labels. We identified those music labels from the videos that we had. And so this is just another way that tobacco imagery in screens is continuing to normalize and continuing to glamorize tobacco in popular culture. There's just no evidence showing that tobacco on screens is benefiting the artist or the music label in any way, and the media industry needs to be held accountable. Reducing exposure to tobacco imagery within these youth-oriented entertainment mediums and entertainment on screens of all sizes is really critical. It has to start to denormalize this in order to prevent use among young people. And so those are just a few of the major takeaways that we have from the report this year.
Now, Sherry, can you discuss your team's findings on tobacco imagery and how this has continued to be an issue year after year?
Sure. So our research shows what we all know is that movies sell lots of products, and movies also sell tobacco products. We showed that among all of the movies, R-rated, G-rated, PG-rated, there's some tobacco imagery prominent in the major releases. Among the movies produced by the Non-Motion Picture Association studios, they accounted for more than 50% of the films that tobacco was featured in, and featured 3 times as many incidents of tobacco use in the the G and PG rated movies. So what we found is that youth continue to get a lot of exposure to tobacco imagery across the gamut of the movies released. And we know that this has a pervasive effect that promotes tobacco use and promotes the normalization of tobacco use way more than is actually in the real world.
Jorge, your organization recently put out a report on the influence that the tobacco industry has had through their Formula One sponsorship and the added reach it's seen through the Netflix show Drive to Survive. Can you discuss how that partnership came to be and what its impact has been?
Sure. We can start with the fact that cigarettes kill one in 2 people that use them, right? So there's a never-ending need for tobacco companies to get new customers, right? And so the strategy is to grow and to get customers for life. So the younger the customer, the better from a tobacco company's perspective. That aligns very well with Formula One, which has a similar aspiration to grow its audience, right? And to get a younger audience. A typical Formula One audience skews older, skews male, and their strategy is to get into people's homes, get a younger audience, and to get more women, right, to be engaged in the sport. And so there's this sort of alignment of business strategies between the two that makes for a perfect deal for sponsoring. Now you enter Netflix, right, which has a global platform, and is looking to grow its sports audience, right? And so essentially what happens then is the tobacco company's sponsorship via Formula One winds up getting broadcast all over the world and achieving the business objectives of all the companies involved, to the detriment of exposing younger people, more women, and men all over the world to tobacco branding. Our most recent research found that through the Drive to Survive program, season 4 alone, Netflix streamed more than 1 billion minutes of content that included tobacco company branding, which is a lot, right? And the average viewer then would have been exposed to 34 minutes of content that had tobacco company branding if they watched the whole series.
Turning to Jessica, as we're talking about the impact this is all having on young people, I'm curious with e-cigarette use, what the effect that has had specifically on the mental health of young people, and how might, this sort of on-screen imagery impact and add to this crisis?
Yeah, this is something that we're really conscious of. The mental health issue is one of the top concerns of young people right now. And it's also just a top challenge. It's a top challenge across the board. It was recently called out by the American Psychological Association that youth are currently in a mental health crisis. So this connection between nicotine and mental health is well established. It's really well documented in the literature. And we have our own surveys that have revealed that young people cite feelings of stress, of anxiety, of depression as reasons that they are starting or continuing to vape. Nicotine has the illusion of a stress reliever. Young people grab onto that, but they're just unaware it can actually worsen mental health concerns. So our current Truth campaign calls this out. We give young people these facts. We let them know that nicotine can actually increase symptoms of depression and anxiety and even stress. And so kind of this issue of normalizing smoking and vaping on screens is just really adding to this larger mental health problem. When we look at when people are using tobacco products on screens, it really seems like kind of two scenarios, right? It's like, we don't go into this in our report, but if you think about it anecdotally, the most times that you see people on shows are stressed, if they're in kind of a bad mental health space, that's when they're reaching for tobacco. And this makes me think a lot of that show Queen's Gambit, for example. And the second kind of reason that people on screen seem to be using tobacco is just this idea of like looking tough or looking cool or trying to portray a certain kind of character.
And I want to point to a few more pop culture examples of sort of starting this conversation. So the MTV reality competition show, The Challenge, has a new episode featuring a contestant who's been vocal about quitting vaping, and they're including a call to action card during the show with resources on how to quit. And then Aaron Sorkin recently revealed that he had a stroke last fall that prompted him to quit smoking. So I'm curious how big of an impact it has on viewers, and particularly young people, to see characters on screen smoking, or conversely to see those in the entertainment industry actively speaking out on the dangers of smoking.
Huge, right? I mean, images have influences, images have influence, images have power. We know that using celebrities works. I mean, it's why we see them in so many ads. The impact of celebrities smoking on our audience was grand enough for Truth to call it out back in 2014 with our anti-tobacco campaign. We called these people unpaid tobacco spokespeople in that campaign because they are marketing tobacco products without being paid. Some of them knew they were, most of them didn't know they were. We know this tool really well, which is why at Truth, we just like flip the same script and we work with the influencers to help others quit by sharing their own journeys. It can be totally innocent, right? Celebrities may or may not know what they're doing. They may or may not know the influence that they're having on our audience and on young people. And this could lead to tobacco use in youth and young adults. We have to educate them. We have to educate these influencers, celebrities, actors, showrunners, creators, distributors, producers. I'm sure I could go on in movie labels and music labels, really the entire entertainment media industry, because we just kind of have to believe that if they know better, then maybe they can do better.
Jennifer, your work is obviously based in California, but you've noted that efforts to make changes has been a multi-state effort. Can you tell us how state attorneys general became involved in fighting this youth exposure to tobacco and the work that you all have done on this issue?
Yes, first, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. And my comments today are my own and not those of the California Attorney General. But with that said, state and territorial attorneys general sued Big Tobacco in the 1990s for lying to the American public about the fact that smoking could kill them. Those lawsuits were settled in 1998 in what is known as the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, or MSA. The MSA requires the settling tobacco manufacturers to pay the settling states every year as long as the companies sell cigarettes in the United States. The AGs enforce the settlement, including making sure that the companies follow strict advertising and marketing restrictions. The companies are barred from targeting youth in their advertising and are specifically prohibited from placing their products and brand names in movies, on TV, and in other commercial videos.
And what are some of the challenges that states have faced in implementing these sort of efforts, and how can working together with the entertainment industry fix that?
Well, the AGs have worked in this space for decades now and have encouraged and pressed the entertainment industry to make specific changes, which I can list for you if we have more time. But the industry has been resistant to making significant changes and adopting robust anti-tobacco policies. So just as an early example, in 2005, the Dartmouth study found that the strongest predictor of first-time cigarette smoking by adolescents was the amount of smoking they saw in movies. So when that information was shared with the MPA, the Motion Picture Association, the MPA responded by engaging the Harvard School of Public Health to conduct its own study. But Harvard's research agreed with the Dartmouth study. Harvard recommended that the media companies not depict smoking in films accessible to children and youth. So that was resistance we saw in 2005. If you fast forward to today, there are still no industry-wide standards to limit youth exposure to tobacco imagery in streamed media. The companies seem to be following policies and practices that are in line with their own business models and the bottom line, and may not be focused on protecting kids.
And you sort of hinted at specific ways that it might be beneficial to work with the industry. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, as Jessica said earlier, we're of the mindset that if someone knows better, they do better. And our hope was that the AGs could be a conduit to providing information about the research and the impact on kids to the industry. And we have done that in multiple ways since the enactment of the Master Settlement Agreement in '98, including making specific requests over the years. Most recently, in 2019, 43 attorneys general, with the assistance of the National Association of Attorneys General, sent a letter to the leading companies with new or expected streaming platforms, asking them to limit tobacco imagery in youth content. And this was particularly concerning to the AGs, given the rise of e-cigarette use by kids. And at that time, 27.5%, that's more than 1 in 4 high school students, were using e-cigarettes. The AG sent that letter and then met in person with the media companies and the Motion Picture Association in January 2020, and have had ongoing communications with some of those companies. Additionally, the 43 AGs sent a different letter in October 2020 to the creative guilds. That would be the directors, the producers, writers, screen actors, and prop masters. And we held a virtual meeting with their representatives in February 2021. So our goal has been to bring the information to the industry and encourage the industry to do better.
Jessica, Netflix responded after the report Truth Initiative released in 2019, vowing to be more mindful of their smoking depictions on screen. Have you all had any dialogue with them since, or with any other big players in the entertainment industry?
We have. We've had a few meetings with Netflix. As the previous top offender in our past meeting, we wanted to applaud them this year with their notable decline. This year, they had a decline, and it put them in second place, not first place. But we know that these shows are not static. People, binging is a thing. And people are not just watching something on Netflix once or, watching only this year's shows. So even though they did better this year, people are frequently binging shows like Stranger Things. I think it was our top binge show. And those shows continue to include tobacco imagery, despite the network's 2019 pledge to eliminate tobacco depictions in youth-rated shows. But this 2019 pledge was never made public. That's something we would like them to do.
And Jennifer, is there anything you can share with us about, a more broad push publicly to work with the entertainment industry?
We've been having ongoing communications with the companies, and I think we're hopeful as a whole, at least I'm hopeful, that the companies will keep moving towards a tobacco-free media world for young people. There's many things that can be done by the industry on an individual basis and as a whole. So my office is available, and NAG is available to assist with that as we can. So we're committed to staying engaged on this issue.
And Jorge, with this new F1 Netflix show, what role does Netflix play in counteracting the influence tobacco has on F1? And do they have a responsibility to keep advertisements off of their programming?
Well, right now, they're having the opposite effect, right? The global streaming of the program provides more incentive for cigarette companies to continue sponsoring through F1 because they're getting additional value through that sponsorship by that content being essentially streamed all over the world. Right. So, I mean, yes, they absolutely have a responsibility to protect youth from cigarette branding. And from, in this case, what we're seeing more of is e-cigarette branding and nicotine pouch branding and all these alternative products, right, that are intended to get youth into the pipeline, right, using any nicotine product and then potentially working their way across the portfolio of products, right? So the networks do have a responsibility in the programming that they're delivering to make sure that it's not seen by, and they're not exposing youth to that kind of branding. But you don't have to take my word for it, right? In France, a lawsuit was brought against a national broadcaster for not doing enough, basically, to cover up cigarette branding or tobacco company branding in Formula One races. And they were fined. The courts essentially said that they weren't doing enough. They could have blurred the branding on the cars, blurred the branding on the hats, right, and taken additional steps to actually limit the exposure. And they didn't do that, and they were fined for it. We're also seeing the government of India, for example, trying to really think about how it can address all of the content that's coming through streaming platforms. It's essentially originating in another jurisdiction, right? But being exposed to local and national audiences. And so they're looking at how they can close national loopholes in their own advertising restrictions to account for that. And so we're starting to see governments step in. We're starting to see some lawsuits, such as the one in France, come to the fore. And so there's starting to be a template for how to address this if the platforms aren't willing to take the steps themselves.
You mentioned a really interesting point, which is this is not just a US-based issue. These are global audiences, global productions. Is there any evidence to suggest, if American-produced entertainment has the same influence internationally that it does domestically, or vice versa?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Hannah. It's a global problem, and anywhere you have a very robust entertainment industry, you see tobacco company branding, you see smoking, you see the behavior that is being broadcast or communicated through to the audiences. We see it obviously coming through Hollywood. We see it through Bollywood in India. We see it in the entertainment hubs of Nigeria and Egypt, which creates a lot of content for the Middle East. And so the same problem exists everywhere. What I would say about the American entertainment industry is it has mastered distribution, right? Not only do we produce a lot of content, we have figured out here in the US how to get it to more people, Netflix being a prime example, right? And so I would say that the influence is not just in the programming, but in our ingenious way of actually getting the programming to as many people as possible.
Now, Sherry, at this year's Academy Awards, we saw that 9 out of 10 Best Picture nominees featured tobacco imagery in some fashion. And it is worth noting that half of those nominees were rated PG-13, but the other half were rated R, so not all of them were exactly targeting young viewers, but still being celebrated on the biggest night in entertainment. Do you see any indication that we will start to see this trend diminish in the coming years?
I don't see any evidence based on the research that we've shown that trends have not changed significantly, and certainly not in the downward direction. So I think that, Jennifer's ongoing conversations with the studios and with the showrunners and the directors and the screenwriters is really, really important to communicate really the effects of this on-screen promotion of tobacco products, because it's extremely effective and it does not seem to be changing at all.
I'd love to hear from each of you, based on your research and your experiences, why is getting the message out about this so important?
Well, I'll jump in. I think that it's so important because the tobacco industry leverages just unprecedented amounts of money to insert their products into every form of entertainment. Whereas from the public health side of the equation, we're working on a much more limited budget, but we have a very effective, clear message that's based on research. So if we can enter the same playing field that the tobacco industry is so effective in, I think that at least helps us not level the playing field, but have some counteracting effect.
Yeah, I totally agree, Sherry. I think we're fighting kind of two big entities here, like two big beasts, right? The tobacco industry, but also the entertainment media industry, who may or may not have malintentions, but we need to hold them accountable.
Yeah, I'll add that as not just as a lawyer, but as a mom, I had no idea about this, the influence of tobacco imagery until I started working in this space. And I was just shocked about the research that was so clear about the pervasive impact about tobacco imagery, exposure on kids starting to smoke and vape. And I just wish more parents knew what I know. And I wish the entertainment industry would do better to get the word out to those families and take their own steps to protect their viewers, their youngest watchers.
I mean, I'd completely agree with that, Jennifer. It's insidious, right? And I think a lot of parents and a lot of people assume that we have advertising restrictions, right? And that their children are not, and they are not being exposed to this type of advertising. And I mean, that's why tobacco companies they're very good at what they do, right? And in many cases, they are not breaking the law, right? The law is just not caught up with their marketing. And so if more people know, right, that there's the risk of exposure through these platforms, through these mechanisms, then they can at least have the information to take action within their own locus of control, right, which may be their TV set, right, their living room, their family, the movies that they go to, right? In the absence of broader policies and in the absence of industry regulating itself, that's, I think, where we are, right? And so we have to be able to get that message out to parents, to families, and to viewers to just know that they're not as protected as they might think.
And I'll just add that there are companies who have taken steps to do better. I'll just give a shout out to Disney and their recent content they made. From what we can tell from the outside looking in, they made conscious choices to not include tobacco in recent releases. and such as the Cruella movie that specifically excluded tobacco. So there are companies that are doing more to protect kids, and it would be great if the industry as a whole could adopt those robust anti-tobacco policies.
That's a great point, Jennifer. I would add to the Disney issue, it's really complicated because Disney is doing better, right? And they took smoking out of Cruella, and that was great. And nothing bad happened when they did that. People still watched Cruella, and it shows that you can take tobacco out and people will still watch the show. But it's so complicated now. The complexity of the streaming landscape got so complicated, right? Because now companies doing better like Disney are airing content with smoking in it, even though it wasn't their original content, like The Simpsons, you can now watch on Disney. This is really worrisome. It's like a way around the public policy. Another example, and that was a great example, another example of a company doing better is recently, Fox got it right with Bob's Burgers. They went from 41 depictions in 2020 to 0 last season. This is great. It also shows again that it is possible to eliminate all tobacco and still maintain a top show within the audience. And so I like to call that out too. We stated this in our op-ed, a cigarette has never saved the world, stopped a zombie apocalypse, made the best list, or helped the hero live happily ever after. And this is why folks doing it right are accounting for youth health and certainly not at all damaging the content in the process. So I like the MTV example as well, right? They put the This Is Quitting app in their upcoming show. And other shows do this. Other health issues do this, right? I think about suicide and the suicide prevention hotline. I think about eating disorder, help for eating disorders going up on shows depicting eating disorders or disordered eating. And so that's kind of that direction that MTV was taking it.
As we wrap up, we've talked about how important getting the word out is. I'd love to hear from you all sort of concrete next steps of what you think needs to be done otherwise to make progress here.
One concrete next step, just kind of for the audience listening at Truth, is we have a Tobacco Free Screens Coalition. We meet monthly with the goal of no tobacco content on youth appealing screens. And we thank this group for their involvement. And honestly, just thank this group for all of your work around this important issue. Our coalition includes the AG offices, academics, local and state programs, youth organizations, healthcare, and government. And so that is one way to get involved. Young people can certainly get involved by visiting thetruth.com. But, really to make progress on this issue, it almost feels twofold, right? There's this education component and this accountability component. It's tricky because platforms can be involved in distributing in many ways. Like I said before, Shameless was originally on Showtime. Now it's on 8 other platforms, but Showtime got the blame of being the top network, for tobacco depictions. So this tells me that really to level the playing field and not make this about platforms means making it about educating the content makers. If people weren't putting it in there in the first place, then we wouldn't have this platform issue and we wouldn't have platforms up against other platforms with this. And we know they all just want to have the best content that they can get. So there's a real opportunity for education here. And of course, the entertainment industry just needs to be held accountable, that we know that reducing exposure of tobacco imagery within youth-oriented entertainment is critical. It starts to denormalize something that they are normalizing on purpose. And so this will prevent tobacco use among young people. So the entertainment industry is really where I think we should be applying so much pressure. They really have the power, like we said in the report, to change the picture for good.
I just want to emphasize and kind of celebrate Truth's work in documenting the evidence and supporting the research that makes the case, that makes it credible to talk to parents, to talk to the studios. I mean, all of us really understand deeply that tobacco advertising is effective and how much goes into the industry puts into promoting its product across the whole spectrum of entertainment. But having the data to back up that knowledge and keeping it current and monitoring it, I think, is critically important to affecting change. So I really appreciate that Truth has kind of led the call there.
Thanks for that, Sherry. It takes a village, and we are so happy to have this village alongside us,
I was going to say, I agree, and thanks to Truth for not just bringing the data forwards, but also convening, being a place of convening for this information to get out there. I mean, as far as, things that can be done, when we think about the Formula One problem, I mean, Formula One is a sport. It has regulators, right? And the Formula One regulator based in Switzerland has said they've made pledges in the past to remove sponsorship from the sport, and then they've walked back from that. Right, so it is possible to make change. I find it hard to believe that there aren't other companies that are willing to sponsor Formula One cars with that kind of audience reach and growth. I think the second thing is that governments can do more, right, as far as putting policies in place, closing loopholes, and enforcing the advertising restrictions that are already there. And then, as we already talked about, there's a role for the platforms here to play in making better decisions about the content that they want to put forward and represent, their own companies and what they want to be sharing with their audiences.
That angle on the products on the side of cars, right? That kind of sponsorship and the branding is really a great one to think about. And I'm so glad we're bringing that angle into this conversation. One of the things we do in all of our coding of the shows and of the movies is when we see an actual brand, a lot of times it'll look generic. A cigarette pack might look generic, or it'll be an actual cigarette that you don't know the brand. But when we do see brands, it is something that we bring to our partners, and we're so thrilled and honored to work alongside the offices of the attorneys generals, and we bring that branding to them to be able to call them out on an individual basis by company. So it's kind of circling that back around to kind of the work we're doing with branding, but it's just so in the face in the report that you had.
I'll flag that the industry's changing, as we all know. The eyes are now consuming content via streaming. That seems to be the way of the future, and the majority will be watching that way. So given that streaming is so new, I think that we're still all learning what the impact is upon kids and families, and we need more information from the companies. So back in 2019, a small group of U.S. senators asked many of the leading companies for data, for information about who was watching what shows, and what more they're doing to limit youth exposure to tobacco imagery. So we really need to partner with these companies to access that information, which really wasn't provided to the senators, and figure out really what the solutions are that are doable in a business setting and that are effective for protecting kids. So I think it really does start with knowing and identifying the problem. And there is research that has come out of India that shows that airing anti-tobacco spots or public service announcements before content with tobacco, and I believe in India it was even at an interim point within movies, actually had a mitigating effect on youth starting to smoke. So there's research in that regard that could be implemented by the industry, especially as platforms are moving to ad-based models. Let's get anti-tobacco, commercials airing before the content that kids are watching that has, smoking or vaping. So I think there's more that we can be done and ways we can identify solutions, and hopefully we can partner with the industry to identify what they are and make it happen.
Yeah, that's something that we had done in the past, and like you said, it's just changing so much. But I remember the DVDs of Mad Men had truth ads at the beginning of them, maybe also at the end, and so it's a harder landscape to get into, but it is a call out in the report, right? That idea of let's counter it with something we know is effective.
I think on the streaming landscape, it's that much more important because in contrast to when we had to actively sit down and watch a movie, go to a theater, we now carry the entertainment with us in our pocket and look at it all day. The hours of screen time that kids and all of us have just gone up dramatically. And so any given exposure gets multiplied, I think, quite a bit, and is why it's so impactful.
Absolutely. And parents have as a parent, I can say, you can't possibly follow everything that your teenagers are watching. It's impossible. They have too much access. And you really, and access to anything with any rating.
And I'll add that protecting kids is a bipartisan effort. It's a bipartisan issue. This is something that transcends politics. Keeping our kids safe and stopping them from becoming addicted to tobacco and in any form, really is a shared goal, I think, of most people.
You hit the nail on the head. We can all agree, right, that we don't want an e-cigarette epidemic, right, or a cigarettes epidemic among the next generation of young people. That's a pretty good starting point to have a discussion around how we limit the exposure of this kind of messaging to those audiences.
And just that alongside the education that it is having a negative impact, right? People do not know, or they say like, oh, well, that is cigarette smoking. Kids aren't smoking cigarettes. Well, our research found that even with cigarette smoking on screen, it's leading to vaping behavior. So, and I think that's a really powerful thing to tell people.
Yeah, so thank you for this opportunity to have this panel and get the word out. The more we can do to bring attention, I think gets us closer to the solutions.
And Jessica, can you point us to where folks can go to find out more about this?
Sure. People can go to truthinitiative.org for more information on our coalition. That coalition has a goal of no tobacco content on youth appealing screens.
Thank you all so much for sharing your insights today, and thank you to everyone at home for watching.
Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
And now we'll turn it back to Robin for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Hannah, for leading such a wonderfully nuanced and fascinating discussion here today on the tobacco industry's influence in on-screen entertainment. I'd also like to really thank Michael Tynan for his remarks, as well as our excellent panelists, Jessica Rath, Jennifer McClory Hamilton, Sherry Emery, and Jorge Alde for joining us here today and for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and your insights on how we can work together on this important issue to end the influence and the impact of industry in popular culture. Thanks also to everyone who joined us here today. To learn more and get involved, please visit truthinitiative.org/tobacco storing role. With the youth e-cigarette crisis continuing to be serious and a real public health threat, I'll end with an open invitation to everyone in the entertainment industry. You are the people that create and shape culture, especially when it comes to the behavior of young people. Please join us in this work. With your help, we can entertain and enlighten and protect our nation's youth. Let's change this picture once and for all. So thank you so much for your time and your efforts, and we'll see you next time.